A few years back, while working in a tool shop, in debt, with no proper education, an ever-growing stomach, and hardly any time or money to do any of the creative things I wanted to do, I thought, is this really fucking it? I'd spent about 5 years on photography and I had basically nothing to show for it. Not only that, being able to afford my own home seemed miles away. And this isn't a sob story. Most creatives I know have found themselves in a similar situation at some point. The thing is, it's not usually through lack of ability or hard work that we find ourselves in these situations. It's something much more complicated than that. So how the fuck did we get here, and what can we do about it? I just want to say I know I'm speaking mainly from a UK perspective, but most of these points are just as valid in the US. I know it's a bit more complicated throughout other countries. Have you ever read about your favorite photographer from the 60s or 70s and heard about how they were completely broke but still living in New York or Paris or London? This is a time where artists and photographers could be pretty broke and still shoot as much as they wanted to or make as much work as they wanted to while living in some of the biggest cities in the world. It sounds great, right? Well, in the 1960s in the US, rent was increasing at about the same rate as the average income. And then all of a sudden, everything changed. Rent and house prices took off and the average income pretty much didn't change that much. We can see the same kind of thing in the UK and a whole load of other places as well. Cities that were once a hub for creatives from all walks of life were suddenly becoming less and less affordable for those people and for the people that lived there in the first place. Today, the average rent in New York is about $3,800 per month, and the average rent in London is about £2,100 per month. And for most normal people, your income isn't going to come close to covering that. And it's not just about living costs. The cost of cameras, gear, any sort of film supplies, any sort of art supplies have all increased a hell of a lot. The barrier to entry is pretty much higher than it's ever been. I guess I'm pointing out the obvious here. We all know that we have less money than we did, and we all know that it's harder than it was. But there's a lot more to it than just that. Have you ever met someone and everything just seems really easy for them? You're working really hard, you're doing all the right things, and this person's just gliding through life. There's no visible reason why. You can't see it. Maybe they're just better than you. Or maybe they've got a lot more resources at their disposal. A disproportionate amount of creative jobs are taken up by privileged people. But the good news is, it's not because they're better than working class people. You see, the person that's gliding through life pretty easily often has a lot of help that we don't really see. If someone's more wealthy than you and wants to do an internship, then they can. Their family can afford to pay for them to live while they do an internship. If they want to go to a special school, they can. Their family can afford to pay for them to go. If they want the newest gear or supplies, then once again, their family can afford to pay for these things. I am conscious that this creates a bit of an us and them feeling, and those are not my intentions, these are just facts. These aren't the only ways that working class creatives can get left in the dust. But first, I want to talk about today's sponsor, Skillshare. As a really affordable way to learn new skills and sharpen old ones, Skillshare is a great platform for learning. There's an entire section on furthering your creative career where you can learn about freelancing, finding a job, or a career and industry. And in fact, this course on YouTube, script writing and editing, looks like the ideal one for me, and I might give this a go real soon. If you want to grow your photography or art skills, then there are hundreds of super valuable courses available so you can take things to that next level. But whether you want to learn crafts and DIY, woodwork, languages, you name it, Skillshare is the biggest online learning community for creatives. So if you feel like giving something new a go, or you want to hone in on some of those skills that you already have, then click the link in the description and the first 500 people will get a free month of Skillshare. So get started today, and thanks Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. As we've already established, poor creatives might not live in the best location, they might not be able to afford the best schools or the best gear and supplies. But there's something else that you might notice: nepotism. Simply put, a disproportionate amount of people in the creative field have family that are in this same creative field or in one adjacent to it. It's pretty easy to understand how this works. I mean, the biggest part of the creative world, near enough, is making connections. So if you're born into that world, you've kind of got the cheat codes. Do you think Gracie Abrams is big in the music world right now because she worked her way to the top? Or do you think it's because her father, J.J. Abrams, one of the biggest directors around, has a lot of money, knows a lot of people, and can help her get into the studio and meet the right producers? Once again, to be clear, this is not a way of trying to diss anyone. If I had those privileges, I would probably use them. But the reason why this is important is because it's important for us to understand where we're at and what we're up against when we're trying to make our way in the creative world. All of this seems to paint a pretty bleak picture of the creative world. But to be fair, this is the same case for most careers. It's who you know. The question is, where does this leave us? You know, the majority of us that don't have a lot of expendable income, if any. It's hard, and I just want to say, obviously, there is a lot that needs to change systemically. But for now, let's focus on what we can actually do ourselves. First of all, I honestly believe that arming ourselves with this knowledge is really, really powerful. I said it before in a video that I just made recently, that I think one of the biggest things that ruins a creative's career is when they have really big expectations and then, of course, those expectations aren't met. Knowing that success might look different to you and that success is still valid and something to be proud of is a really big step in the right direction. For instance, I've got a good friend who's an artist that makes really distinct designs, and they were doing really well in COVID. Since then, she gets some consistent commissions, and because of that, she can make some money from her art and also works in a coffee shop. For her, that's enough, and that is success for her. Realizing where you're at now and that your path will look very different to the people that you look up to is a really freeing feeling. It can help to put things in perspective, and even though you might have big dreams, it's a realistic idea of, okay, I'm starting from a completely different start point. Next up is educating yourself as much as you can on things that you're actually really interested in. I know this sounds like a bit of a no-brainer, but since the creative world can be so hard, it's best that you do the thing that you actually really enjoy, since there might be a chance that you might not make as much money as you wanted to. Of course, there are lots of expensive courses that might be really valuable, but as I said before, there is Skillshare that has a hell of a lot on it. There's obviously things like YouTube, and books are great as well. When I started YouTube, I had no video skills whatsoever. I didn't have any background in any of this at all. Since then, I've made about 100 videos. I've learned how to edit, how to script, how to produce a video, how to, get all the SEO right and titles and thumbnails, all of that stuff, which is also really valuable. My mentality was kind of, if this doesn't work out, at least I'll have a lot of valuable skills. Of course, as we know, educating yourself doesn't mean you'll necessarily get the job of your dreams. Some dude whose brother knows a guy might just get it instead. But it does give us a fighting chance. Next, of course, you could build more of a social media following. Mainly, I'd focus on building a website and building a kind of email list, because that's one of the best ways to make sure that everyone knows what you're up to and you always keep that email list. The only thing that makes this difficult if you're a creator that doesn't have much money is that a website costs money every month, and so does an email list. So there is something that I think is much more valuable and doesn't cost you a monthly subscription: building real connections. As we know, a lot of jobs are down to who you know, and especially in the creative world. And while we can't always afford to move to the big city, we can make real connections wherever we are. Obviously, it depends on what kind of work you do, but as a photographer, you can go to photo walks, exhibition openings, talk with your local photo book store owner, and also you can reach out to people that you look up to, or mentors, or local photography enthusiasts. Just get to know the people within the community of the work that you do. I mean, these are the connections that you have to work hard for and gain by being a genuine person within your community, rather than having them handed to you like some other people. Something that most working class creatives don't have the luxury of doing is doing work for free. And it's frustrating because that's what a lot of the creative world is kind of built on. Helping out behind the scenes of a photo shoot or video shoot, or assisting a photographer for free, and then maybe down the line you might get some work because they know you and they liked working with you. And this is why it's important to have a normal and consistent job in the background. I guess you could call it a enabling job. It enables you to do the creative work that you want to do while you're trying to build up to what you actually want to do, without, leaving you at risk of economic insecurity. I know it's easier said than done. I spent quite a while last year trying to find the right job that would fit around the stuff that I'm doing, and I was broke in between that time. But once I did find it, it gave me the opportunity to take more risks. And while I was taking those risks, it didn't mean that if they didn't work out, I would be completely broke. It just meant going back to how I was living before, and that was fine. Not being from a privileged background means we need to work a lot harder to get to where we want to get to. So you've got to celebrate those little wins along the way. And you've also got to remember that being in the creative world is a process. I mean, I've been a photographer for like 10 years, and I only just now feel like I'm sort of figuring things out a bit. If you're comparing yourself to someone who's rich and lives in LA, and you're not rich and you live in, Bolton, then you're not going to be very happy most of the time. I've tried to include in this as many things as I could that have helped me out over the time that I've been struggling with money and struggling to try and find my way in this world. But everyone has different challenges, and everyone has different things that might be holding them back or making their life harder. So if there's anything that's really helped you over the years and I've not mentioned it, then definitely put it down in the comments, because I'd love to know what the crack is. If anyone thinks that I was oversimplifying how easy it was to be an artist or photographer in the 60s and 70s, then maybe I was a little bit, so sorry. Of course, there were still different challenges, and I'm not saying that was just completely easy. I'm not a professional writer of scripts, so it's not always the easiest process for me. Before you go, be sure to watch this video about 3 things that really held me back in my photography, and they could easily be holding you back too.